Sahana Vavatu, Sahadau Bhunaktu, Saviryam Karavavahai, Tejasvinavaditam Astuma Viddishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work mutually together in a cooperative spirit. May we gain strength and understanding. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So this week I have decided to speak on a subject in answer to a question that I get asked often. Is there anything special about a mantra in a spiritual practice? Could we take any mantra or any sound or any phrase? Is any one as good as the other? And so why use a mantra is the subject of tonight's talk. I also decided to do this on Zoom and have it edited on our YouTube channel, so it won't immediately appear live on YouTube. And that is an attempt to field questions at the end of this talk to make it much more interactive. Last week we had something of a problem with the microphone, and we went to the Zoom, but the problem was it wasn't recorded. I hope that this time it will be. So I think in order to explore this question, we have to ask a number of things. Firstly, what is a mantra? What does it all mean? And what is not a mantra? And the word mantra, of course, has been used now in popular contemporary language, meaning some kind of repetition of a saying or something of that nature. It can be used in business and so on. And this is one example of where this term has and is being misused. So I think we should try to define what it means. So what is not a mantra is also easy to describe. It is not a meaningless sound. And I always remember coming across an experiment where a set of people, a group of people were made to chant something like humming or something that had no intrinsic meaning. And the obvious example was to get a group of people, and I've done it also, to sit and say, please repeat this mantra after me. And they all relax, they close their eyes and so on. And I say, okay, here we go, ko. And everybody says ko. And then they say ka. And they say ka. And then I say cola. So Coca-Cola. And you see, of course, it's a great joke. Everybody enjoys it. Everybody laughs. But there's something important behind it because there's an actual experiment. And that has no meaning. And therefore, it is not a mantra. And it cannot be used as a mantra. A mantra is a sacred sound. And it is a sound of an embodiment, the embodiment or the sound embodiment of the highest principle. And when the highest principle is personalized, we call this a chosen ideal, technically called Ishtadevata. So a mantra is a sacred word, not just a sacred sound, but a sacred word. And there's a whole science behind the idea of word and language and meaning, because we think in words. And when somebody tells us something, a series of formations occur. The sound we hear, first of all, requires a number of components. It requires somebody to vibrate sound in a particular formalized way. And that is carried through the air. And because the air is a fluid, the sound comes as vibrations. My ear catches it. It's arranged like a trumpet. And then that vibrates. The components of the ear make a vibration. And that translates to a nervous system. And that translates to the brain. And the brain then recognizes the sound. But something remarkable happens, and it cannot happen within the brain. And that is a picture is formed. So there's a subtle version of it. There's not only the gross object. Let's take the case of an elephant. If you say elephant, a gross word like that, even if you point an elephant, and say, there's an elephant, or a picture of an elephant external to me, or a live elephant at a zoo, and then later you remember that elephant, then yes, elephant comes, and I can assure you, there's not enough room in my head for an elephant. So there's something very subtle there, some replication which is there in what is termed the mind. And I don't think it's fair to say this is the material brain. So, because we don't know what is the boundary of a mind, we don't know where my mind begins and your mind ends. It's something like a mental field. And in a mental field, we haven't really established the length and depth of it, the measurement of it. So, the idea of a mantra is associated with repetition of a word, and the word mantra is a Sanskrit word, of course. It comes from manana. Manana, the man part, symbolizing thinking. So it's a thought, and it's a thought process that is associated with a word. And trana, the tra, will come from freedom. Freedom from what? Freedom from felt bondage. And Vedanta will say, we're not bound at all. We only feel like that. It's only a perception. And then the next question is, if we are free, if our intrinsic nature is free, how is it that we feel bound? It's a good question. And the answer, of course, is that we are bound by nature's natural forces, threefold forces. We call these the binding elements or gunas. They were bound by a misunderstanding or misinterpretation of our environment around us, beginning with our own body. And so all religious systems, spiritual systems are designed to get this freedom from this bondage, whether it's described in this way or not. That's the ultimate prize. And inherent in us is this urge for freedom. Everybody wants it. And it expresses in us as the will for political freedom, freedom of expression, freedom of gender, freedom of individual choice, all kinds of freedoms we look for, we seek. And the thinking person may surely find the connection and say, it must be that intrinsically, as part of our inner nature, we desire freedom. And if we desire freedom, it means we haven't got it. It means that we are bound, that we feel bound. There's a great example of this that the 19th century mystic Sri Ramakrishna gives. He puts it that it's like a cow or a calf tethered to a pole and allowed to roam a field. And if it's a long enough rope, it is under the misunderstanding that it is free, so that it eats all the grass and what have you, wanders off within a vast perimeter, doesn't know that it's bound to a pole. And so this is how we're operating. We seem to have a free will, we seem to have free choice, but it is purely conditional. And freedom itself and will are contradictory terms. Swami Vivekananda points this out as well. But our nature is free itself. It's free already. We don't have to liberate it. We don't have to open up the cage doors, something like the rib cage with the lock and key, and maybe the key fits into the navel, we open it up, and then now we are free, and a bird flies out, that kind of image. Many people have that kind of image. But no, our fundamental nature is this immovable, immortal, witness, knower, thinker entity, which is universally present. And religion identifies it, either internally or externally, as some kind of supreme principle, God, or some such name. And of course, because it's outside or seen to be outside, if we leave it outside, then we'll never get to grips with it, and the freedom will not be ours. It's a bit like you discover that there's an uncle living far away, let us say Australia, and all of a sudden you discover this, and then you start corresponding. Normal way to do it these days is by email, and then you get on so nicely, and you like each other very well, And then you start phoning. And the modern technology allows us to phone as if you were speaking to the person next door, but still you have no idea what this entity looks like. And then you decide, all right, we are permitted to travel, let me now go, and we'll go and meet. I'll fly to Sydney or something like that, and we'll meet in person. With each interaction, I'm learning more about the person, and I'm getting closer to the person, and I'm understanding the person more. And my love of that person is increasing also, because the knowledge of that person is increasing, until ultimately I decide, let me live in your house and help you, and so on and so forth. Why should we have a relationship at a distance? And so I then go and immigrate to Australia, and so on and so forth. So this human relationship is a good example of how we sometimes approach God from a devotional point of view, until we get into a position of ecstatic love. And ecstatic love, as I mentioned last week, ecstatic love is an elevation of the spirit where the whole mind, the whole body, everything, every part of your being is saturated with blissful love. That nearness becomes oneness. And that oneness, although there's a small separation, sense of separation, the devotee does not want to be sugar, they want to taste the sugar. Even so, finally, instead of sipping the honey, as it were, from the outside of the jar, diving in ultimately and becoming that bliss, a subjective experience beyond measure and beyond description. So, how can a sacred word be of assistance to us in this freedom process? There's a very important statement, or really a question, to the consort of Sri Ramakrishna, the wife of Sri Ramakrishna, and it was Swami Purnananda, one of the disciples of Ramakrishna, who asks a question to the Holy Mother. He says, "Mother, how can I realize God? How can I have unfoldment?" That is a way of asking, how can I complete my evolution so that I can experience my own freedom? How can the God in me come out fully? And her reply was like this: Japat Siti, that's the first thing. Second thing, Japat Siti. And the third thing, Japat Siddhi. So what does that mean? Through performing japa alone. Perform japa to perfection. And she repeats it 3 times. That is how significant and important it is. What is japa? The systematic repetition of this sacred word or sacred phrase. So japa is the repetition of a mantra. And when we repeat this and it becomes habitual, when we do it methodically, then it's more than just a word, more than just a sacred formula. It gives us a reconciliation of the divine power of the mantra. And this mantra, of course, is taken from a guru, a competent teacher. We'll come on to that shortly, and what the significance is. Of course, next weekend, next Saturday, literally, is Guru Purnima. And so it is appropriate that we try to understand the relationship of this mantra to a guru or a competent teacher, somebody who has attained this perfection, or at least somebody who is experienced, at the very least, in the ups and downs of life and spiritual practice, and has gained some competence in spirituality. The significance is that when the teacher, that competent teacher, is inspired to initiate a person into spiritual life. Of course, our whole life is spiritual life, and our whole life has been spiritual life, and that is what we are calling evolution. But this catalyst that occurs when there's a natural meeting, a recognition, this is the person that I want to direct my spiritual life. I see that this person is like an open channel of divine grace. And I see that the divine is flowing through that person, that entity. And for that reason, that entity is considered to be one and the same with the source of it. Not the person, not the human person, but that divine entity, that divine element that at the point of this diksha or initiation is aligned, is attuned to that cosmic mind. And from there comes this sacred word or series of words that exactly encompass the chosen ideal for the devotee in most cases. And that has a potency because it comes from a direct line. It comes from the infinite source itself, the great cosmic mind of the universe, the personal God, the entity that is consciousness expressed and comes out as a word. There is a science to this, so not only should we understand what is a mantra and all the variations of such a thing, but also, is there a science to it? Is there a way in which it works? And so from the discovery of mantras, that is these sounds, these came from rishis, from wise people in the depths of their meditation, in the depths of superconsciousness, in that state, they discovered them. It's not that they were invented, they were discovered. So it is this discovery that they came across, and then from there, a whole science has developed. So this sacred word has the capacity to call forth, that is, amantrana, to call forth anything you like. And there are two types of mantras given. One is Vedic mantras and the other is Tantric mantras. Tantric mantras, Vedic mantras are words that have some meaning. And of course, the primary word, of course, is Om. And there's a whole Upanishad dedicated to this word Om and its meaning. The whole range of consciousness is expressed in this combined aspect, this combined sound symbol, that it is discovered in the depths of spiritual practice. And other sounds, other vibrations are also revealed during the process of primarily meditation. Meditation evokes an inspiration that comes from deep within. We can't interpret it as beyond, but somebody who hasn't been through the discipline may well do that. But somebody who systematically unfolded the consciousness from within, the different layers and levels of consciousness. In the yogic language, this is put as chakra. That is a kind of wheel or vortex, a level of consciousness in increasing layers and levels of subtlety, and each one unfolding more and more, just like that example, beginning with a discovery of a relative in Australia, and then correspondence, and then phone calls, and so on, until ultimately there's a meeting, a one-on-one meeting. So all of this is progressive. And I think it's a good system to do it progressively. If you discover God one day, you'll make a military coup against him tomorrow. So a progressive revelation. What is faith? Faith is a progressive revelation of the truth. Often today, there are neo-atheists who are keen to disparage faith because they see it as a position of blind faith and ignorance. That is, believing something without evidence or sufficient evidence. When modern science has revealed so much, but modern science, in the realm of physics at least, despite all the technology and technological advances come from modern science, is in a kind of confusion and crisis. It doesn't know if it's coming or going. and it probably requires a complete overhaul. But you see, this false dichotomy between faith and science is not a real thing, because when we investigate what is the truth, and the science comes from skio, that is a will to know more. And when we know more in this world, it should surely strike us that there is a manifested condition that we call this world, and a manifester somewhere. How to discover it? Well, we discover it like we discover everything else. And when we say elephant, as you mentioned before, then another picture of an elephant comes in my mind. It comes before me. So the word has evoked an image. And I can do it myself. So by evoking an image, the word comes. I can't avoid the word and the image coming simultaneously. In all meditation, just now, a little earlier, we did a guided meditation. All meditation is guided. All meditation is an internal script going along with a series of events leading to a position of concentration of one thought in the mental field. That's all. A continuum like oil being poured from one vessel to another, never stopping. And this pouring becomes a unity, a beautiful unity of being, and pure sense of existence and bliss. That's the culmination of such a thing. But how to prepare us for that? And this is where the mantra comes in, among other effects. So it's calling something forth. And there are, according to the Hindu tradition, 4 aims of life. So we can call forth even material things. And in the Vedic tradition, there are mantras which will be curses, mantras which will evoke some bad things as well as good things, but largely the Vedic mantras evoke good things. And we'll see that the ancient way of showing a sense of wonder and appreciation and adoration and praise to all these manifested forces throughout nature. And you'll see it as hymns of praises. And when you're accompanying this with the ritualism of lighting a fire and putting offerings into it, along with mantras, it soon becomes the fact that the science of it says that we can control nature by these acts, these ritualistic acts, and these mantras. So that if this one entity can manifest in so many different millions and millions and billions of forms, then each one can be considered something like a devata. And every devata will have its sound. That means will have its vibration, its rate of vibration. Whether the ear catches or not, the sound is there. The vibration is there. Vibration is always there. Then how did this universe start? According to the Vedanta and the yogis, it started by a state of equilibrium. And from that state of equilibrium, even that had to be projected. And from that state of equilibrium of evolutionary forces, something erupts, and a willing entity, a mind is there, a cosmic mind is there. And in itself, it doesn't do anything because it stands there as a potential, a kind of link between a causal position and a subtle manifesting condition, such as thought. But the thought has to be manifested. And this manifestation of thought is called Vag Devi, the feminine, and has come to us ultimately as Saraswati. And that is why we don't find in India too many temples dedicated to Brahma, the creator. I think we find about 2, because it is Saraswati that does the work. Now, Saraswati is really, in tantric language, Shakti. That is power, energy, dynamic energy. This is the Shakti. This is the universal energy. And where does it come from? It comes from the word, universally accepted concept. So that in John's Gospel in Christianity, it is there, in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was God, and the Word was with God. So like that, this first vibration, this beginning, even in the biblical Genesis, there was a speech, let there be light. It came from a word. It came from a conversation, a series of words, and from those vibrations comes all the other manifestations of the universe. So this universal concept of word manifesting is there, coming from a cosmic mind, a mind that directs, a mind that establishes rhythm, order, harmony, the laws of nature, which probably are not fixed, but are flexible enough to adapt to a changing environment. So, in describing what is mantra, we can see that it is an entity that can call forth other vibrations that ultimately condense into scenes. This idea that the whole of nature, that is the whole of matter and the whole of material things, can be resolved into energy. But not only that, we can see this energy as a series of waves, and waves have a causality, because for a wave to have a peak, there must be a hollow. And for another hollow, a peak must then drop into this hollow, which then creates another wave. And this thing about, if you use an analogy of waves, then this universe would be compared to an ocean, and there's no separation between the wave and the ocean. The ocean is one. And the wave will never, in liberation, in full knowledge, will never misidentify itself or declare an independence as a wave. It'll always know itself as the ocean. That is, there's a substance. So three things seem to be there: a substance, and using again the analogy of a wave in the ocean, and then there's a form of a wave. Not every wave is standard. So there'll be different kinds of waves of different magnitude, different frequency, different amplitudes, but all the same thing, all part and parcel of the ocean. And when we have discovered some unity of existence, some general source, some oneness that is more subtle and more causal, then we have this knowledge, be it in the purview of modern science, or be it in the purview of that which is beyond it, the absolute underlying substance that erupts into all these things. Now, in all of this philosophy, we have never made a separation between a creator, external, and a creation. This dualistic system has been left out because that creates many, many complications. But it's useful for us to think that this world is very close to being just a series of waves that come and go. And all these waves are manifestations of the ocean. And so it was a discovery that in the ancient times that, by the way, by using these mantras, we actually can control all these manifestations called devatas, all these deities, all these forces of nature. It's not that God is controlling us, we are controlling God. And so from that, you can do anything good or bad, but there are primary aims, all aimed at the goodness. Primary aims would be that there is a system of morals and ethics upon which everything is built. And the definition of that is any thought, any word, any deed that expresses and maintains a harmony that knits and holds everything together. This universe is in a state of harmony overall, with occasional disruptions of this harmony, otherwise it doesn't work. But overall, underneath, everything is working in a natural way. And of course, these disruptions occur because that's the nature of things as well. But man has the capacity to make order out of chaos, to stream negative entropy on himself or herself and make orderly. Entropy is a rate of scrambledness. You can spill a cup of tea on the floor, but you can never reverse it. You can never suck all that up back into the cup. It won't happen. So entropy, a degree of scrambledness. You have, say, something like eggs, and you can make scrambled eggs. You can't unscramble them. So that's so the whole thing is moving toward that. And one of the evidence of that would be death. Death would be this entropy. But we are controlling negative entropy. We are controlling order. We have the capacity to take discord and all the ups and downs of this world and transform it into something useful. There's a normal story I give that illustrates this. And you may have heard it before, but there was a farmer and a neighbor, and the farmer was going to collect water, had to do it every day, had to do it through the neighbor's field. And the neighbor, there was no legal water rights specifically. The farmer was permitted to go through the field, but somehow the neighbor resented it, and so also had a weird sense of humor, and so decided every time the farmer comes through to collect his water, I'll ambush him, and he won't know from day to day where it's coming from. I'll position myself in different places and ambush him with a bucket of cow dung and throw it over him and run away. So he did this for 1 year. And at the end of the year, probably around about December, Christmas time, let's say, then there's a knock on the neighbor's door, and the neighbor opens it. And there, standing there, is the farmer. And the neighbor starts getting worried. He's now going to take it all out on me, since I've abused him for a year and giving him all this cow dung. And so a little bit warily, he looks at the farmer, and the farmer smiles. And from behind the farmer's back, he presents the most exquisite rose flower. And he says, you know, this coming year, with all the cow dung you gave me, I managed to collect it, and I've grown beautiful, beautiful roses. I'm now exporting them. And I would like to give you this rose, but it is on one condition. What is that? Says the neighbor. Well, in this coming year, will you please double the quota? So you see, from all the crud of life, from all of the so-called misfortune and pain and misery and all the negativity and the COVID virus and this and that, we have, as humans, the capacity to transform harmony out of discord. Now, how is this associated with a mantra? Because a mantra is a thought. And so we can manipulate our thought by manipulating words. Not just any word, but if we want the highest freedom and the highest revelation, we can use specific words. And we mentioned that the mantra of all mantras will be this sound symbol Om that represents, not only represents, but actually is akin in its gross form to this first stress, this first movement of the entire cosmos that set the whole chain of events off. What are these chain of events? They're in the form of vibrations, obviously. So this Om that can be heard by the yogis in its more authentic, subtle form, sets up, because the yogis will have tuned into this cosmic mind. And so the next thing that comes is all the sounds of the particular manifested subtle forces. These we call tanmatras. And the first most subtle one is Akasha, and the whole of the mind is seen to be a composition of this Akasha. Now, Akasha, unfortunately misunderstood, misinterpreted as something like the luminiferous ether that was done away with in modern science. But it is more akin to subtle matter in space. And there's nothing more subtle than mind. And there's nothing that moves faster than thought itself. So if we can consciously steer this thought by use of a specifically chosen word and something given to us specifically that tunes us in, tunes the mind, tunes the thinking in to this highest reality, then it will be a great thing to practice. So that is why this Holy Mother was saying japa, japa, japa as one of the most important aspects. In fact, the most important practice. Spiritual practice contains japa, it contains meditation and prayer. All of this is hugely important, but we start with japa. And that is a repetition of the mantra done in a systematic way. Tantric mantras are largely bija mantras. Bija means a seed. That is the sound of the element, the sound of the tanmatra. And these tanmatras are not different or separate from this one entity. All vibrations are different names and forms of this one cosmic entity. Names and forms and variations that come from this one central movement, this shift. And the whole universe is a series of that, a series of vibrations. And we can access any part of it by repeating as close as we can the sound symbol of it or the sound embodiment of it. And in that way, by meditating on its meaning, we access the thing in itself. So the highest principle called Ishvara or God is mentioned by Patanjali in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. And his manifesting word is Om, he says. And the way is repeating this and meditating on its meaning. And that is why Coca-Cola doesn't work. And that is why a meaningless sound does not work. It may be relaxing because it's rhythmically put. Like anybody who sits in a car on a long journey, there's a tendency to nod off. In Zimbabwe, we call this fishing, the head goes down like this and then suddenly comes up, something like that. And but I never do it, by the way. I don't believe in wasting proper attention time, but it is tempting because the lull of the car is there and the temptation to blank the mind off is there. And if you have any kind of spiritual system that says, here's what we do in meditation, repeat a mantra, don't understand what its meaning is, just a sound, it'll have the effect of bringing the mind into a very peaceful condition. Yes, it'll bring it into the numbness of sleep. It'll dull the mind. It'll lull the mind into a sense of sleepy, false security. So a mantra is a revealer of a special aspect of consciousness itself and within the devotee, and it's called forth and it appears out of the mantra. We mentioned the 4 aims of life. So the mantra can be used, for example, somebody in trouble, something like that. There's a mantra that can be used for that, prescribed for that. Mantras for many, many different reasons. And so artha, wealth creation is one of these aims of life. And that is wealth creation for all, because the basis of it is dharma, selflessness, that brings everything into harmony. And then the next aim will be all the legitimate desires associated with the human entity. But the 4th aim, ultimately, is moksha. It shows us the underlying purpose of our whole life. And in this way, gives us a great direction. So to prepare the mind, get a mantra from a suitable teacher that will have a certain potency, preferably. And understand that mantras are vibrations, and it's akin to if you have a tray of sand and a tuning fork, and you vibrate this tuning fork you'll see how the sand arranges itself in different patterns. In this same way, when we exercise these sound vibrations, then the whole of matter, as it were, our material reality, conforms to that, and the sand shuffles, as it were, and we create what we have in front of us. The mantra is a creator. So now, how does it work? We've touched a little bit on the science of it. So, and we mentioned also, I mentioned that that it is not an invention, it is a discovery coming from the superconscious. But there are 6 philosophies in Hinduism, and Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Samkhya, Yoga, Purva Mimamsa, and Uttara Mimamsa, which is otherwise called Vedanta. But the Purva Mimamsa will take things a little further. It'll say that is based on the ritualistic portion of the Vedas. And what they say, of course, is that, and the author of this, or everything is attributed to Jaimini, their author, and Jaimini holds that the Vedas are not just teachings and spiritual laws and so forth, and principles and so on, but even their very words are eternal. The thinking is, of course, the Vedas are eternal because they are discoveries of truth, which again is not invented, but something discovered. And he's saying not only are the Vedas, but the very words contained in the Vedas, these are absolutely eternal. They're uncreate. That is, there's a connection between the word and the object named by it, between the sound and the sense. And while we may or may not disagree or agree with this, at least we can take the purport of that you cannot have a word without a corresponding concept. It's absolutely impossible. So the idea is that the non-perception is due, non-perception of the inner subtlety of something, the truth of something, is really because of the absence of the union of the hearer with the sound. And the sound ever exists, but becomes manifest when it's uttered by a person, by a human, through the voice box. I mentioned that mind is considered to be a manifestation of the subtlest vibration called akasha. And the akasha, the vibration is extremely subtle, hardly noticeable. And so that is the concept. The thought and the name rise up together. That's the point. And they rise up together in consciousness. And that is why in all these various scriptures, the description of all this whole manifestation of existence is called nama rupa, name and form. The form is the external manifestation of it, but it's not a standalone thing. There has to be a corresponding nam. There has to be a corresponding concept. That is the form of it. So as whole science has developed in this, and the Indian philosophers considered the study of language an integral part of philosophy. Max Muller, the great Indologist, has this to say. He says they, that is these great rishis, had evidently perceived that language is the only phenomenal form of thought, and that as human beings possess no means of perceiving the thoughts of others, nay, even their own thoughts, except in the form of words, it was the duty of a student of thought to inquire into the nature of words. Before he approached or analyzed the nature of what we mean by thought, that is naked thought, nay, skimmed thought, as it has been truly called, when divested of its natural integuments, the word, they understood what even modern philosophies have failed to understand, he says, that there is a difference between Vorstellung, presentation or precept, and Begriff, concept. And that true thought has to do with the conceptual words only. Nay, that the two, word and thought, are inseparable and perish when separated. Patanjali modified this Jaimini's idea, and he said, yes, of course, the Vedas are eternal, but this doctrine of the sound, Shabda, as it's called, sound, by holding that the substance of the Vedas is eternal, but not actually the words. It's what the words represent. It's the meaning of it. And another school of thought, that is Bhartrihari, 7th century sage, he expounded a certain wonderful concept of Svota, as it is called. And that is that those who know sound know that there are two sounds in the words we speak, one the cause of the sound, and the other denoting the object. And this means that the one sound exists in the mind before we utter a word, and the second is the uttered word. And the potential word which is in our mind, he calls Svota. And this Svota is also called Shabda Brahman. That is Brahman in the form of sound. A wonderful idea. And then this Shruta is actually in philosophy called Hiranyagarbha, that is the golden womb, the origin, the creating factor, the causal factor of all the rest of the manifested universe, and that is really a cosmic mind. When I first met my philosophy teacher, and I was very young, I asked him some interesting, not really interesting, but some foolish questions. One question I said is, oh, what about this, picking up another person's thoughts, what about this, what do you call it?
Telepathy, isn't it?
Telepathy, yes. Some people are pathetic, other people are telepathetic. So what about this? How does that work? I wanted the science behind it. And he said, oh, that. He said, well, you think there's your mind and somebody else's mind and so on. It's like having your own, radio station, your transistor is there, but the broadcast, there's only one broadcasting station. And when two people tune into that simultaneously, you're catching the same broadcast. There's only this one mind, this cosmic mind, this Hiranyagarbha, this Garbha womb, this golden womb, which is there, from which everything is born. Even that is poetic language for it. So that is this cosmic mind. First manifests itself as name, and then as the eternal, inexpressible Shvota. And the essential, eternal material of all ideas or names, the power through which the Lord creates the universe. The Lord first becomes conditioned as this Shvota, and then evolves himself out as yet more concrete, sensible universe, which is there. And this has one word as its only possible symbol, and that is, you have it, Om. Yeah, this Om. So this cosmos, this word, indicated universally in many, many different traditions, comes to us. We can consider it to be the causal stress. And so by repeating this word, Om, and meditating on its meaning, we ultimately get to that revelation eventually by this practice. Sound proceeds from this, and all matter is vibration. And it's something like a seashell. When you put a seashell to your ear, you may hear the ocean. In that same way, when you use a mantra systematically, you'll hear that sound. That is what you'll hear in its subtle form. And by repeating it in its gross form, with the association nama, its subtle idea, you ultimately get to it itself, and it becomes revealed. Why would we use it now? What is the practical reason? Well, we've discussed how the Holy Mother sees it as not only as significant, but vitally important. And so the question is, in terms of spiritual use, is there a technique that we should use in this repetition? So yes, there is. First of all, we have to repeat this mantra repeatedly, called japa, with a sense of devotion and faith. What is devotion and faith? Devotion means that with the word, it's no good just repeating the mantra. We have to put in the feeling, because it represents something that is real. It is the sound embodiment of this Lord of the universe itself. And so when we repeat it, then it evokes a meaning if we are to connect with what it means, what it is, what it represents. So with devotion and also with faith, and I mentioned briefly how neo-atheists will posit faith as blind faith, a mere belief, a kind of medieval superstition, not understanding that this word represents a whole range from blind faith to unwavering conviction. And on the way are progressive revelations of the truth that increases faith. Sometimes in meditation, you may see forms. Sometimes in meditation, you may see colors and lights and shapes. And sometimes in meditation, you see the reality revealed when you are in listening mode. But to condition the mind into this state, japa is necessary. Sitting down, therefore, thinking that your guru, the one who gave you this special sound embodiment, this mantra, this means, this great tool that you have, is important to sit down before even sitting. The tradition is you wash, you bathe, you wash the body and you put fresh clothes on. You're about to do something sacred. Even that activity purifies body and mind. And now you're prepared to sit. And in sitting, you think of your guru or your competent teacher in front of you. And you see this entity in a transparent way as representing ultimately this God that sits behind and works through. And the normal situation for doing that is to seat that entity in the forehead. And then from there, you reverentially repeat the mantra progressively. And again, you're doing it with God in mind. What that whole mantra represents. And if it is a phrase, each part of the phrase is significant. And it is important to repeat that 100,000 times until the mind naturally gets saturated in the object of this repetition, the nama rupa, until you actually see the subtle form of it. And there, the mind is ready. And even during that process, you may go into this whole idea, this whole experience of meditation itself. And meditation, of course, is not mere contemplation. Contemplation, even in the Christian sense, that we hear monks contemplate. No, contemplation also is a preparatory stage. So a few words about meditation itself, therefore. So we get many, many misunderstandings. One question says, somebody says, oh, yes, I meditate. Okay, please describe your process. No, I am just aware of the mind and what is going on in the mind, or I'm doing breathing. And that's good, because if you stop breathing, you're in trouble. But that's not meditation. These are all preparing a runway. In order to take a flight, it's necessary to prepare a good runway. We already have the equipment, we have the airplane. Prepare a nice runway. But where will you end up? You will end up going above the clouds, beyond the rainbow colors, beyond the fragmentation. And so it's to take a flight above the clouds where a unity of existence, pure consciousness is there, standing alone, and you feel a oneness with it. And the step-by-step process, whether it's through the path of devotion, whether it's through the path of discernment, jnana, or whether it's through the path of karma, yoga, or whether it is through the path of concentration, all of these require meditation, because it's only there that you have the intimate experience of this fundamental essence of who you are and what you are. And in the devotional language, suitable for most people, to understand truly and connect with the most beloved entity that is your most personal ideal of God, revealed to you by the teacher, through the teacher, until you come to an understanding that the ultimate knowledge, that moment of aha knowledge, and the teacher and the mind become one and the same thing, until you realize that you, teacher, God are one thing, is only one thing. So next to Om in significance will be the Gayatri mantra, very simple thing. Let us meditate on that entity that illuminates everything. May that illumination come to me. So, but that is a significant Gayatri. Gayatri refers to a meter, a way of repeating it. But that is a very significant prayer. And so that also has a potency and can be repeated as well. And then, of course, we come to the idea that repetition of a mantra should be done not just in formal practice, but 24 hours of the day, repeating it. And then it becomes mantra, a protecting thought. So we can define also mantra as a protecting thought, something that buffers us against all the obstacles in life, on the physical plane, the material plane, on the psychological plane, and in the spiritual life. Saturating with the mind with God's presence and God's name. As soon as you say the name, you'll recall that entity. Practicing the presence of God by lovingly repeating the name continuously until it enters and saturates the subconscious mind. And in doing that, it has a revealing capacity, an illuminating capacity. And so you'll find that as you fall asleep, which I hope you're not doing now, as you fall asleep and repeat lovingly this mantra, you'll find remarkably, you'll wake up with this mantra on your lips. And in this way, you practice it. The most remarkable journey of the mantra is described in a book or series of books, The Pilgrim's Way, by a Russian Orthodox pilgrim. And he's pondering about this statement, and I mentioned it before, of to pray without ceasing. How can we possibly pray without ceasing? And then he discovered the power of a certain phrase that he took as a mantra. And it was the repetition of this and meditating on its meaning that he began to be familiar with this and understood the potency. Ultimately, there's a sadhaka shakti. That is, the sadhana shakti takes place. A power, a potency comes within the spiritual practitioner. And then there's mantra shakti as well. A mantra shakti is more powerful. But it's to access that and join the two together until we see that essentially they're one and the same thing. Is accessing your own shakti, your own power, the power of the Shabda Brahman, the power of Brahman as vibration, as sound. This is the supreme use of the mantra, and this is why we should use it. Now, because this is on Zoom and to be recorded by YouTube later, and because we have the opportunity for interaction, and there are 7 participants there, so I'm going to actually see if there are any questions or comments in relation to that.
Swami, could I ask, is japa part of the yoga darsana? It was embodied in that or brought out by Patanjali as part of that action?
No, not at all. It is common to all the yogic practices. So whatever yogic practice you take up, it was common to the Vedic practices, it was common to the tantric practices. These 2 varieties of mantra are there. And normally, to get the full potency, you combine the 2. but they're both emphasized and have specific sections glorifying the efficacy of this practice of japa. Absolutely. It's an essential part of spiritual practice, actually. Yeah.
Thank you.
But of course, if it's an essential part of spiritual practice, can you and should you take any mantra, any old mantra? No, but if you don't have, then the most significant will be Om, or at least the Gayatri mantra, because that merges into the pranava, so we say, and all mantras merge into that, and that merges into Om. So you may as well repeat Om. And I've heard many people actually say, oh, we've heard that we are not permitted. Only Brahmins or realized people or something are allowed to repeat the Gayatri mantra. Well, of course, you know, those who have the sacred thread, the at the age of say 9, they get that initiation. It's initiation to the Gayatri mantra. So it's misunderstanding this whole thing. It's misunderstanding the fact that we take for granted when you use a mantra that you have the prerequisites of a student, namely that you have a discerning faculty with you, that you are able to distinguish between what is morally good and not, what is real and what is not, what is fleeting, what is permanent, that you are detached from the world, and that you at least are practicing elements of concentration, elements of forbearance and faith and purity of mind and so on, called 6 treasures. But more than anything, that you have a thirst for freedom, or you put it in the bhakti yogic way, a thirst for God. So bhakti yoga uses japa very primordially. We can take even those Vaishnavites who particularly use this, and but any devotee would use this as a technique, because if you love somebody, you'll subconsciously be repeating their name. In human relationships, if we were to make that comparison, when 2 young teenagers fall in love, see, there's a kind of madness and the chemistry flows and what have you. And every time you think of the person, you'll bring up their name. And every time you bring up their name, you'll think of the person. It's inevitable. You cannot have a word without concept. That's the fact of it. So by evoking the word, you evoke that entity and the love increases. You say, well, I don't really have love of God. I'd like to cultivate that. But pray to God for that, and then repeat this holy name with love. So there's that. But the most potent mantra comes from a guru. And that is a kind of faucet with the whole pipeline traced back to reservoir. And in spiritual life, everybody requires a guru, because the system of learning, even scriptural learning, will be shravana, hearing from a teacher. And then manana, that is applying some independent contemplation and thinking about it, guided by the teacher. And ultimately, meditation on it. So all of these things are necessary, starting with that. And in karma yoga, it's practiced. In jnana yoga, it's practiced. In bhakti yoga, it's practiced. And in raja yoga, also it's practiced. All 4 of these approaches and systems are keen to use and praise this japa.
Thank you.
Swami, I'm a bit dull, so I didn't really get it, but with Nama and Rupa and cosmic mind, are the names are already pre-exist within cosmic mind, and then when it's being say like on the level of an individual human being, an individual jiva, like the vibration of the name is there before we externalize it in speech. That was one of the. Am I on the right lines there?
Yes.
So that in a way the names are in cosmic mind. They're there as part of the original sort of divine vibration.
Yes, absolutely. They're held in potentiality in a causal state.
Yeah.
Then when the causal state erupts into the first subtle names, sounds actually, and those sounds then concretize as forms in increasing levels of subtlety into the universe that we have, and you and I.
And then by us repeating, by us taking the name, we're linking back. We're sort of like backtracking back. Even if we don't really fully understand it, we are connecting back through that. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be trying to understand it, but you know, I'm sure like people who are like spiritually orientated, when they say the names, they are getting linked back, even if they don't, you know, even if they're not realized themselves. In a way, there's a relationship. They're being related back to cosmic mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to understand really what the sound is symbolizing. And we only catch our own interpretation of that initially, but that deepens. It's what I call making friends with your mantra. And the more we repeat it, the closer we get to what it represents. In the devotional sense, we're practicing the presence in an audial form. And then when we see how the mantra then reveals itself as this God. Yes. And so that happens progressively. Yes.
Yeah. There's a sort of even if initially the mantra sayer doesn't comprehend the profundity of the mantra.
Yes.
The mantra itself is going to sort of reveal.
Yes. So
the emotional side is there.
So that depth of understanding will be revealed by this repetition. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you,
Swami. Swami, that's where you were quite strong in the opening thought, like, you know, sort of where certain traditions have been, I can use the word, become westernized, and we have this phenomenon of meaningless sounds. But that's not conflated with what Dermot said. I mean, it is a devotional sound. It has a devotional meaning, and while a Western mind doesn't understand or isn't close to the full context, it's the primordial nature of it.
Yeah. Now, in order for it to saturate the unconscious mind, we have to be careful not to slow the process down by taking every single sound contained within the mantra and contemplating deeply on each one. And I put it in this way as an example. So if I use anybody's name, and for privacy, I'll say Jim. So if I say Jim, I don't have to pause for half a day to think what is the significance of it. When I say Jim, I automatically know what it means. So, so there's a fine line, as it were, between the one side rapidly saying something, you know, the Roman Catholic, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you, and so on, all right? And so if you say these mantras like this, and it happens in every religion, that you say these various prayers, and you don't know the meaning of it, and everybody ignores it, it just becomes a ritual, that's all. So that's why the Purva Mimamsa was keen to say, actually, there is every word is sacred and eternal also, but you know, the idea is that there is a concept that accompanies every word, and once you understand that and repeat it with a certain reverence, with the understanding that this divine presence is here and is now and is named, and that becomes there's an enrichment that comes from that I have just called this the Shakti of the individual practitioner. And that is because the mantra has a potency. And the most potent mantra is the mantra that comes in the process of initiation or diksha from a guru. Yeah, that will be necessary to everybody who has matured to the state of readiness for that.
Swami, you know the second commandment, thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain, is interesting because it just kind of clicked with me that if you see him as nothing other, if you see him as anything other than the absolute, it's taking his name in vain.
Yes.
The ego is crept in.
Yes, yeah. No, absolutely. That's probably why that is there, is to say the sacred, you see. That comes out in the Christian, our Father who art in heaven. Of course, you can adapt that, you see. Our Father, our Mother, who art here in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Your name is sacred. The very name is sacred.
It's continually lifting the human being to the level that it should be at.
Yes. Instead of dragging God down to your level.
Yeah, we're all criminals.
Yeah. All right. Okay, good. So we leave it there.
Very good. Thank you, Swami.
All right, good.
Thank you, Swami.
Om